For people with touch-enabled devices, being able to work in touch mode has a lot of perks, but also a few frustrations. SOLIDWORKS 2019 aims to alleviate some of those frustrations by adding some functionality to the pen tool, so it's easier to create the sketch entities you want, as well as adding some general quality of life improvements. To show off the pen tool changes then, I'll start a new sketch on the top plane and sketch an elliptical shape with my stylus. Based on how I sketched it, however, SOLIDWORKS created a slot, something that the pen tool couldn't do until this year. This isn't what I wanted, however, but since a slot and ellipse are so similar, redrawing it may not create the entity I'm looking for either. Instead, I can use the Convert to Ellipse tool from the shortcut options to immediately change the entity I created. If you don't catch the mistake immediately, however, don't worry. You can still swap it at any time by selecting the entity and clicking the Convert to Slot or Convert to Ellipse tool, depending on the current state of the sketch entity. This entity swapping isn't just limited to slots and ellipses, however. If I draw a spline shape, you'll notice that there is now a Convert to Composite Shape icon. When I click it, the spline is converted into lines and arcs, and while these may not follow the exact shape my pen made, they will be much easier to constrain later, and can always be switched back by selecting one of the entities and clicking Convert to Spline. If drawing straight lines or arcs onto a tablet isn't as precise as you'd like, 2019 also added ruler and protractor tools that you can control by touching and dragging. Once positioned, simply draw with the pen near the edge to get perfectly straight lines or accurately measured arcs. The last sketching mode enhancement I want to mention is that you can now dimension on the fly with the pen tool. For example, I'll make sure the line here is selected and then simply write the number 4 near the line. Then, once SOLIDWORKS recognizes my handwriting as a number, it applies a 4-unit dimension to the line. Before wrapping up, I want to mention a couple of other enhancements made in this year's release. While sketching, I can now hold down my finger on the screen for a moment to bring up the selection tool near my finger. This can toggle on or off from the System Options, Touch Options with the checkbox here. Finally, once you have an entity selected, you can drag them with your finger to move them.